Dr. Siyabulela Mandela, thank you so much for joining us. It's a real pleasure to speak with you. Like your late great-grandfather, you're a champion of human rights. What do you make of what's happening right now in the world and specifically in the Middle East?
Well, for me, one of the concerning issues is that the values that we hold dear as members of society are now the values that our forefathers fought for, the values that they went to prison for. They are under threat. If you look at where we are, even in geopolitics, the talks of ceasefire, the talks of peace, the talks of peace building, the talks of diplomacy, those are talks that are no longer featuring in the table at the moment. No one, if you speak of ceasefire, you are looked at with questionable judgment, you know. And in a world that is supposed to be democratic and free and fair, how is it possible that we condone and allow violence, senseless violence, the killing of children to happen, to continue unabated without even considering ceasefire and engaging in diplomacy to find alternative ways to resolve that particular conflict? That speaks into the trends on how the world is going.
What do you see as the similarities happening now in the Middle East and in Israel, and what happened in apartheid South Africa?
The South African position, or the position that the government and the general public has taken in South Africa, is to say what Israel is doing to the people of Palestine, it is in fact an apartheid state, it is an apartheid regime. We argue it is that because we went through it. The signs are pointing to the fact that each and every step, from land dispossession to systemic violence to continuation of occupation and the continued senseless violence, you know, the genocides that are happening, it points to the effect of exactly the characteristics of what apartheid regime was in South Africa. And the most important part about it, Farah, is that the very same global narratives that are being developed and the same global lines that are being drawn were the same lines that were drawn during when South Africa was going through the state of violence and apartheid regime. I mean, I'll give you an example, for instance. The so-called terrorists today, I mean, Nelson Mandela, the leader that is widely celebrated by the world today, was the terrorist #1, you know, from the US. The US made it clear that Mandela was in fact a terrorist. And for 30 years of that time, the world was watching and in fact adopting a position to say what was actually happening in South Africa is normal and it should continue.
So when you're talking about terrorism, though, Hamas is labeled a terrorist organization. I mean, what they did on October 7th is clearly violence. So how is that? How do you square that?
Well, it's correct to argue and say we must actually frown upon and we must criticize Hamas for actually waging a senseless violence against civilians. It should be considered as a war crime. And in the same vein, what Israel is doing, the senseless violence towards a civilian, it should equally be labeled as a war crime. It should equally be labeled as a crime against humanity.
Your great-grandfather was quoted as saying, "Our freedom is not complete until there is freedom for Palestinians." What do you think he would make of what's happening today?
So Mandela was not idealistic when he made those assertions. And to be quite frankly, I think he would be highly, highly disappointed at the leaders of today and the decisions that they are making insofar as what is currently happening. Neither was he too idealistic when he argued that perhaps an alternative solution to that conflict is if we propose a two-state solution. Because we did it in South Africa, you know, hence the world looked at us and marvel and see us as a miracle. It's not a miracle. It's two conflicting parties coming into a realization that the violence will never resolve the conflict. They ought to find alternative ways to deal with that conflict.
Thank you for speaking with us. It's been such a pleasure meeting you.
It's been such a pleasure meeting you too, Farah.